There is no way on God's green earth that John Colter could have gone where a lot of people want to take him and go through that country in the middle of the winter and get back to Fort Raymond. It's impossible. And if you've ever spent any time in that country, you'd find out how quickly it is impossible. John Colter's route was much, much shorter than most people want to make it to be. And I think probably in the last 20 or 30 years, for us that have been doing a lot of research on Colter and where he went in the park, I think most of us are in agreement that he probably came into the south end of the park, went up around the tip of the bottom tip of the lake, passed around the thumb, cut straight. He never mentioned seeing the falls. He never mentioned seeing any of the thermal activity in the park. Doesn't make one mention of it. And if you follow the route in which he took, he wouldn't have seen any thermal activity. He wouldn't have seen the falls. Because if you go to the thumb to where Towers Falls is, you miss the river, you miss the falls. And if you've ever been in that country, you can be 100 yards away from Yellowstone Lake and not even know it's there because of the denseness of the trees. You can stand there at Thumb and look east across Thumb, and you have no concept there's a lake beyond the Thumb. You can't see it. All you can see is the Thumb sitting there. Now, I'm not saying I'm right, but I'm not saying I'm wrong. I think as historians, what you need to know is that nobody really knows, but I think you need to know that the old concept of where Colter went on his trek is probably wrong. And probably one of the greatest things that gave evidence to that was the old route, was the Colter headstone that was found in Pierre's Hole in 1917, where they found a head that had been chiseled out like a man, and written on the side of it is J. Colter, and on the other side 1807. Well, of course that means John Colter spent the winter in Pierre's Hole, chiseled out that rock, put his name on it, and put the date on it. And then went on in the spring and finally went back to Fort Raymond. It's interesting to find in that same valley, in that same area, they have found stones with Meriwether Lewis's name on it. They have found stones with William Clark's name on it. And the reason why is some of the major expeditions that went into this country to study the Yellowstone Park in the 1870s used Pierre's Hole as a campground where they spent their summers. And men sat there and they carved fictitious rocks. The Pierre's Hole Colter stone is fraudulent. It's a joke. And yet we still got people believing it. Finally, I've seen that the stone, they finally got it out of the boxes up there at Colter Bay and put it away because they don't want to have to answer all the questions that came about it. But anyway, I would bet 99.9999% sure that the Colter headstone is a fake. And you take that out of the trek of which John Colter took, of which most people want to believe, and you have nothing left. It just falls apart. Now, very quickly, what time, Vern?
Time.
Is it time to quit? Oh, gee. Okay.
We can come tomorrow.
Come tomorrow. Can I have 5 minutes?
Yeah.
5 minutes? Okay, very quickly. Colter returned back to Fort Raymond, 1808 probably. Once again, doesn't say on the map 1807-08, it just says on the map 1807. A lot of people want you to hold you to that. They want to say, look, the whole trek was taken in November and December. And if you're going to hold it to that time period, you really reduce the time and the distance of which he could have traveled. He returns. He had to tell the people about Colter's Hill. And from that time on, you start to see it in the documentation that there was a place called Colter's Hill. And like I told you, it is not the park. It is the junction or the forks of the Stinking Water where Cody, Wyoming is today. If you go up to Buffalo Dam, I don't know if you're aware, if you could have drained that dam out of the Buffalo Dam there, Buffalo Bill Dam, underneath is nothing but hotbeds. In fact, you can still see the thermal activity above the top of the dam today. You talk to any geologist and look at the maps at the turn of the century. This was a hot spot at the turn of the century in 1900. In fact, there used to be bathing houses all over in that country where people used to go into that country to bathe in those mineral springs. This was Colter's Hill. Now very quickly, Colter will return. When he gets back, Manuelise is on his way back to St. Louis to get more supplies. He turns to John Colter and he says, well, I'm gone. I want you to go back into Blackfoot country and I want you to make contact with the Blackfeet so when I get back up here in the next spring, we can take our supply goods and go right into Fort or into Blackfoot country. Lisa takes off and goes back to St. Louis. Colter now takes 3 trips into Blackfoot country that summer. 3 times he almost gets killed. Most of you in here know the story of John Colter's run. This was from the second account, when he went in with John Potts. When they were caught, Potts was put to death. Colter was taken a prisoner. You remember, he was given a chance to run, and he ran. There's been movies, there's been books, there's been all kinds of things written about it. On that second trip, he dumped his traps in the stream, thinking if I live through all of this, I'll come back and get my traps. So he went back in the 3rd time. When he went back in the 3rd time, he almost got caught again, but escaped and got out. He disappears in history. We don't see him again until 1809. In 1809, here's Manuel Lisa coming back up the river. They go over and spend the winter of 1809-10 at Fort Raymond. In the spring of 1810, they head for the Three Forks. That ends up being a bloodbath. George Juilliard is killed. 5 other men are killed. John Colter, who escaped not being killed or came into the fort temporary building that was being built there, threw his hat on the table and said, "By damn, I promised myself 3 times I was going to leave this country. This time I'm going to do it." Reuben Lewis said to him, "Before you leave, let me write a letter to my brother Meriwether." He didn't even know his brother Meriwether was dead at the time. He'd already committed suicide. Reuben didn't even know. Writes a letter to his brother Meriwether, gives it to John Colter. In fact, the first line on that document says, "I'm sending this letter to you by your old friend J. Colter." Colter leaves and goes back to Fort Raymond, arrives there on May 1st. He says he got in a canoe with another man who had a letter. This letter was written by Pierre Menard to his cousin, Chateau. They float down the river and they arrive in St. Louis on May 31st. Took them 31 days to float down the river. John Colter will never go back into the mountains again. When he got back to St. Louis, he went to find his old friends, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. He finds out Meriwether Lewis is dead. William Clark's in Philadelphia. He spends the summer. While he's there in the summer, 2 noted men, Brackenridge and Bradbury, both interview him several times. Okay? I wished I had time to talk to you about Thomas James. He was an American who had gone upriver. He was there at the Three Forks when all this butchery was taking place. We know more about John Colter through Thomas James's journal than any other source that we've got. Colter will get married. He will eventually get his land that was owed him from his time with the Lewis and Clark expedition. He'll have 1 son for sure. We know it was named Hiram. In 1811, when Wilson Price Hunt was chasing Manuel Lisa, they're having a race up the Missouri River. Bradbury, a scientist from England, stops at John Colter's home and goes to work for him. Says, "William Clark told me that there was a fish on the upper Missouri that he had seen, that it was petrified and it was huge, but he couldn't remember where it was." And he says, "Can you tell me where it was?" And William Clark, John Bradbury says that John Colter couldn't help him. But he says, "We walked together along the river." And he says, "I could tell John Colter wanted to go with us. He wanted to go back into the mountains." But he said, "I just got married, and I don't think my wife would appreciate me leaving." That is the last primary documentation we've got of anyone that left any record of John Colter when he was alive. 2 years later, he was dead. May 7th, 1812, mustered out the day before. Thank you.